Start our board meeting at 6 p.m.
Kentosh,
Here.
Director Martinson,
Here.
Director Curtis,
Here.
Director Stone,
Here.
Director Quillisi,
Here.
Director Ulrich,
Here.
and Chair Bird.
Here. Okay, we're looking now at item 3, consideration and adoption of OVSD Resolution 2023-05, enabling continued use of remote teleconference meetings in accordance with Assembly Bill 361. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
You have a second? Second. Bill, who was our first on it? Bill.
Okay. Director,
I'm sorry, you're taking roll on that one?
yeah, so I had a motion from Director Quillisi and a second from Director
Yeah.
Ulrich. Is that correct? Okay. Director Kentosh?
Am I voting now?
Yes, you are.
Okay, yes.
Director Martinson,
Yes.
Director Curtis,
Yes.
Director Stone,
No.
Director Quillisi,
Yes.
Director Ulrich,
Yes.
and Chair Bird.
Yes. Okay, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready to begin. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
States of America.
and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Allison, are there any additions or amendments tonight to the agenda?
No additions to the agenda, no.
Are there any public concerns tonight for items that are not on the agenda?
I have a green speaker card.
Okay,
Mark Chevelle.
17 Sierra Road, Ojai.
yes, Mark, thank you. Are you going to address the board here tonight?
I'd like to just briefly address the board.
Sure.
As you know, I retired 1 November of last year. Just like to come and thank the board for 19 years of support I've got. Some of you were actually here then.
I was just barely there.
You're barely here. I'd like to thank you for supporting the workers with kind and timely COLAs. Supporting us with our equipment, and it was much appreciated while I was here. Knowing that the current workers won't come to something like this, I have to address some concerns that have been thrown my way. Their low morale, being that I left in November, Tom left shortly afterwards. We just now filled one of those spots. My spot still hasn't even been interviewed for. So morale is low, and not just in collection system. They're concerned with pay differentials. They're concerned with partial salary surveys. They're inadequate, incomplete. There hasn't been a district climate survey on left. You guys really haven't. You really have no direct contact with the workers. And most importantly, you don't have contact with the people who have retired. With disheartened, there's no exit interview process here. I was recently out at the Ojai Valley Inn, and my wife and I were overheard by a nice lady that goes by the last name Lopez. And she said she's actually addressed letters to some of the board members with her concerns. So directly. Mrs. Lopez is currently a senior HR director somewhere in the Southland. And she's coming home to Ojai soon, and she intends to run for the board. She's concerned. And I was blown away. She basically gave me an hour exit interview sitting there and, melt my brain about things. So he's coming your way soon. She was very concerned about the salary surveys and some of the other things. The last thing I'd like to pitch for both the election system personnel and the personnel down at the plant is standby pay. Been pointing out for years that we're not keeping up. We're not keeping up. Never gets heard by the personnel committee or anybody. So if I've talked to Tom, talked to Lisa, all three left last year. We're more than interested if the personnel committee wants to do exit interviews with us. It's just whatever. Mainly, I came here to thank you for the support I had and moving on to my next phase of which is actually helping other collection systems straighten out their problems.
So we might run into you again at some point.
You may, my address will soon be Satsuma, Florida, but I'll be coastal, going back and forth. I have a 92-year-old father here I take care of. Actually, I have two addresses. Back and forth.
Some airline miles.
I'm already a gold. Airlines.
Would any of the board members like to address what was brought up tonight? We do have a study coming up just any time.
Well, hopefully it's comprehensive this time.
Yeah. It really looks to be.
Top to bottom.
It's good feedback that you've given us here.
I thought you had moved already. I walk along Sierra regularly, and I thought I saw a different lineup of cars at your house.
No, it's still the Audi, the Avalon. Now during the holidays, you'll see a whole parking lot there. All sorts of cars.
That could have been it, yeah.
Big vehicles from Reno and Oregon and all kinds of places.
Thank you for your service here.
Well, you're very welcome.
Team,
I did enjoy the majority of my time here. And I learned a lot, and hopefully I taught my people a lot too.
it was very smooth, I recall.
Yeah, and very sorry to hear about the two major line breaks.
Avoidable.
Nothing you could have done to prevent it from what I can see. Stop the rivers.
Yes. You can do a lot, I don't know about stopping the river.
Thank you, Mark. Good luck with your travels.
Appreciate that.
We will cover some of your concerns at some point here in the near future.
I appreciate
The
that.
exit interview, I wasn't aware of that, so maybe something that we can look at too.
Yeah, Mrs. Lopez pointed out to me and their big Southland, they exit interview everybody, especially retirees. Anybody that moves on out of the area, they feel they get the most pure feedback that way.
Biased if there's 1 foot out the door.
Or both feet.
Very true. Did we have another? Please state your name and your address.
My name's Leslie Rule, and my address is 403 North Fulton in downtown Ojai. So I'm actually here to introduce myself. I am the newly elected city council person for District 1, and I am your new liaison. So I wanted to come by and say hi. I'm also working a lot with housing, and so having a housing forum. One of the things that we'll be touching on will be ADUs and a lot of ideas around connection fees and how that's actually working with the sanitation department. So that's sort of where I'm going in the next month and a half or so. It'll be a forum at Kent Hall on March 9th where we'll be talking about housing. So I just wanted to say hi and all that kind of stuff. I'll be coming on probably on Zoom if that passed and if it's possible. But I did want to just introduce myself.
Good to meet you. I've noticed you being very active myself just in the last few weeks, so
Yeah.
that's good to have.
Yeah,
Good to have you.
Thank you.
Great. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Steve.
You had a town hall in February.
I did, yeah.
Do you plan to make this a monthly sort of thing?
For a while, yes. So the next one will, like I said, be on housing. And as things bubble up, so I will be, because we had between, depending on who was doing the counting, yeah, I know, right? You were right on the side there, between 60 and 80 people. So what we have found is that the community is very interested and wanting to communicate around issues in a somewhat less formal than just doing public comment. So had it been 12 people, maybe not, but given that it was so well attended and that housing, there are things that are going to be bubbling up that the community needs to speak about. So yes, most
You
likely.
don't hold them at 10 or 10:30 at night either.
Somebody.
Gosh,
Public
no.
comment.
We're 4 to 5:30, and then I hang out for a while to open discussion. So, and thank you for coming. I much appreciate that, and for your input as well, kind of keeping me on the straight and narrow there in case I veered a little bit over to, things that weren't
Thank you.
exactly
Thank
correct.
you for introducing yourself.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, we're moving on now to consent items, items 7, 8, and 9. Any comments from the directors?
From Burgess, make a motion to approve. Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve consent items 7, 8, and 9. And, Allison-
Second.
Got you, Jack.
Got it, Jack.
Thank you, Jack. Listen, go ahead and take a roll call if you will.
Director Kintosh,
Yes.
Director Martinson,
Yes.
Director Curtis,
Yes.
Director Stone,
Yes.
Yes.
Director Ulrich,
Yes.
and Chair Berg.
Yes. This is what Mark had brought up. Your item 10, classification, compensation, and organizational study. Item 10, accept and approve the proposal from CPS HR Consulting to perform the classification study, total compensation study, and district organizational in accordance with their proposal dated October 29th, 2022, for a fee in the amount not to exceed $86,100.
So this is the follow-up from the board meeting in November. We went back to both consultants with a series of list of questions to fine tune and answer some of their assumptions in their proposals. That was on the 28th of November. We went to the board. On the 29th, the next day, we sent out those questions and we gave firm RGS 2.5 weeks to clarify their proposal, provide additional information. That was on the 16th of December. On the 16th of December, we've still not gotten any phone calls, emails, anything. Hey, can we talk? Kind of conversations. On the 16th of December, we got an email saying, hey, they've been busy, they've been sick. Can they get some more time if we could allow it? So we still have no response from them on updating their proposal. I think there was a series of functional questions that we had asked them. And so today we have no additional movement on that proposal. We went back to the personnel committee, had some dialogue about that. Sort of the consensus to bring it to the board for discussion at this point in time, given where we've been.
So we have one bid.
We have one proposal. The second proposal, really, we felt was missing some of the pieces. If there was some conversation about the one proposal we have, these are professional services. These are not bids. We're not building a widget here. We're asking for someone to bring in, their professional expertise and knowledge. And the second proposal from RGS, really we felt was missing some of the pieces and some of the explanations necessary to explain to us that they adequately understood the problem and understood the process that we were going through in terms of our class and comp study. And so when we asked them to explain those things, they never came back to us with any explanation of how they came to those solutions. When you sort of look at it dollar for dollar, the last time we did one of these studies was in 2018. The proposal from RGS was actually less than the dollars we spent in 2018 for a more simpler scope. So we had a more complex scope, and time has passed, and I would expect inflation to at least have some influence on price. And neither of those things came to pass. So we think we have a simplistic scope at a dollar figure that's less than what we spent in 2018. And so I don't believe that the second firm adequately understands the complex problems that we want them to come in and help us sort of define and redefine. And so, we're still stuck with then only one proposal that does, we feel, meet the scope and intent of the project and demonstrate a firm understanding of the problems that we want and the questions that we have to ask.
Okay, my experience in 5 years of contracting is you look for the lowest cost, responsive and responsible bidder. Responsible meaning that you believe that they can actually do the job, whether it's for the price they quoted or not. Then responsive, did they actually promise to do what you asked? I think what we have here is one responsive bidder and one non-responsive bidder.
Mr. Kintosh?
Yeah, one of the reasons we kicked this down a couple of months in December was because the personnel committee was a little bit uncertainty as to the outcome of this. So I'd like to hear the recommendation of the personnel committee on this.
Okay, the Personnel Committee, was that Mr. Martinson and
Myself and
That would be Bill Stone this time.
I was part of that meeting.
yeah, we looked at this and all decided we would bring this back to the board. Remember that we had any major questions, or we discussed it last committee meeting.
Okay.
We decided to bring it back to the board, with the proposal that we have in hand and amend approve.
And Jeff, from what I read in the agenda here, sounds like staff was actually saying that the CPS HR bid was actually very complete and all the criteria.
I think when we looked at the scope of work we did in 2018 and the scope of work we're proposing now, we believe the scope we're doing now is more complicated, more thorough, more expansive than what we did in 2018. And we've had a couple of very long conversations with CPS, and they would ask us questions about innovation and why we had certain things a certain way and what we were looking at to accomplish. And so they probed us for questions so they could understand who we were and what we were trying to accomplish. And I think the scope of work they proposed, it not just met, some of those conversations, but met their interpretation of how we would solve some of those problems and questions. We never had that with RGS. They never called and said, what do you mean by this? Why do you think that? Some of those probing questions so they could understand us. I think the proposal from CPS answers those questions because they wanted to know and understand who we were and what we were doing versus, the second proposer. And I think CPS is a well-experienced firm, and they're going to be able to do both sides of the proposal for us, which is a classification study that deals with an organizational structure, job descriptions, all those sorts of things. And then once they have those complete, then doing a complete compensation study to say, hey, how do those obligations, responsibilities of the various positions in our organization match other agencies and other firms?
Jeff, what was the time frame What was the expected amount of time that this study would take?
I think we're thinking that it's going to take about 6 months.
6 months.
But we think we're gonna have it in a couple of chunks. We're gonna have some initial conversations about organizational structure and some reporting of communication. Then we're gonna have some discussion about roles and responsibilities and job descriptions. And then finally, the compensation piece, once we've ironed out sort of our organizational structure and some of our.
And before this study, last study was in 2018, and what about before that?
I didn't look back. Typically, it's been our practice to do these class and comp studies every 5 years. And so I don't recall when we had done them before 2018. I think there was one 5 or 6 years before then. And then 2018 and now 2023.
Are there any recommendations or comments from the board?
I just have one question, Randy. I was going through this again. And the last page, it had pricing philosophy. I don't know if that should trouble me or not. See, we're seeing one price for what they've given us. And then this says here that they've got all alternate approaches may be discussed with the district, which may change the proposed cost of the project. How realistic is that? I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that.
I'm real firm on you give us a price and you give us ours and we're going to stick to them. We've
Contract.
if someone wants to get into a project, any design project, and the scope changes, well, we're going to stop before the scope changes and the dollars are incurred. We do this on every design project. Engineers come in and say, well, I didn't include that. And you say, well, you gave us a proposal to do it. You need to do it. I can't really think of a project on the design side where we've gotten into it in my almost 12 years here. And the thing took a right-hand tangent and we would stop. We would stop and say, wait, stop. If our design or our professional effort is veering radically from where path we all understood we were on, both us as staff and you as the board, we're going to stop and come back and say, let's figure this out.
That's not an unusual kind of clause in there. It says to me, as I used to say to my OD customers, if you decide as we go along that you want some more stuff, we'll talk about it. And the scope of the contract can change and the price of the contract can change if we both agree to it in writing.
We kind of call it in the design side, you call it scope creep. You start here and then it creeps away from you. And we have to stop unless there's some radical thing. There's really no reason to do that. Sometimes you may get into construction and find, some buried thing and you have to deal with it. But in a professional services contract like this, I just don't see that happening.
Jeff, was there any doubt or concern with anything any conversation that they had?
No, I think we had very good conversations. I think they were very enlightening, some of the questions they would ask and why they would ask them. And I think it'll be a very enlightening study about who we are and where we want to go and how we organize for the next 20 years and some of the things that are occurring in our industry and businesses, in general.
Do directors have any comments regarding this proposal? Because it's now time to entertain a motion if that's the case.
Move to approve item number 10.
Second.
I had some comments. Are you not listening to me?
Item 10. Will there be any further discussion on the item?
I would like, are you guys hearing me?
Yes, go ahead.
All right. I thought maybe I was on mute or something for a second. As far as timing, every year in April, I think April 30th, our district and every other special district is required to report their compensation data to the state, and the state then publishes that in the, I think it's called publicpay.com or something like that. Is there any thought that it would be worth waiting until that data is available to start this study, or did they mention anything about that as far as the compensation side?
Well, we are required to report that data by a certain date in April. Now, when that becomes publicly available is hard to really say. We've reported data a year and a half ago for Transparent California that is still not available to the public. So what they choose to do with that and when they make it publicly available, we have no control over.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure what date they publicized it either. I know it was available in October, but I didn't look before that because I didn't know it existed. My whole thing on this whole study has just been cost. I don't have any problem with the concept of it. You know, I'm just choking on the cost, and I will continue to choke on the cost. But I've fought that battle in the personnel committee, so I don't think I need to go through all my reasons for that again. But anyway, that was my question.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Allison, please take roll.
Director Kentosh,
Yes.
Director Martinson,
No,
Director Curtis,
Yeah.
Director Stone,
Yes.
Director Quillisi,
Yes.
Director Ulrich,
Yes.
and Chair Berg.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Item 11, fiscal year 2023-2024 budget preparation schedule. Jeff?
So every year, we started doing a one-year budget. But every time we do a budget, we usually start about now, February time for staff to start pulling together information. And then we start in April, we present the budget, we have a study session, we go through a series of meetings. And we have to have that budget adopted by July 1st of the next fiscal year. And one of the pieces to that budget is whether or not we're going to do a rate increase. And if we do a rate increase, we have to comply with Proposition 218, which is a noticing and hearing process that's specified by state law for raising of utility rates. And so since we don't know today whether or not we will do a rate increase, we have to outline a budget meeting process timeline that allows us to meet all the statutory notices. There's a 45-day notice before a public hearing. And then after the budget's actually adopted, it has to be published in the newspaper for a period of time before it actually goes into effect in order to deal with the potential for any appeals. And so by putting together this schedule, it doesn't mean we're going to have a rate increase. It means we're making sure we have the right time slots available if we do. I don't see a rate increase coming based on where we are this year. But we're going to go through the process and put out all the information that we need to put together a good comprehensive budget. Even with inflation raging, everybody's been doing a good job of managing their budgets and choosing maintenance and pumps and wiring and all kinds of things necessary to stay within those budgets and inflation pressures. But we still have to put together the schedule now. So this schedule before you is really the budget process with the caveat of it leaves slots available to comply with 218 if we have to. So unless there's any major heartburn over any of the meetings, we kind of have to keep some of these special meetings where they are so that we have the statutory timelines. Timelines.
Okay. The conversation on this subject. Jim, go ahead.
I have a question. Reading the schedule over, it seems like everything's pretty tight, which it has to be. But let's say something goes wrong with our 218 process, it goes awry somehow. Can we then, if we decide that the Prop 218 process doesn't work, we're going to keep our rates the same, therefore enough time with the county to let our last year's rates just roll forward into next year?
Yes. So So this process, I will tell you Prop 218, and not to sort of, I'll just be blunt. The Prop 218 is a protest vote. So if we do a rate increase, it's a protest vote. We send out ballots to every, we kind of oversend ballots, meaning we have to send them to every ratepayer. But we also send them to every property owner because some property owners are not, they don't live in the house that's on sewer service. And so we end up sending one to the house, to the renter, to the tenant, and we send a notice to the owner. Well, we have notices that go worldwide, literally. There are people living around this world who own property in the Ojai Valley. So, but a protest vote works in the way that we have to receive more than 50% plus one vote to invalidate an action of the board if you adopt a rate increase.
2% plus one of what?
Of the total property owners that are served by the district. Now, we oversend the ballots. I can tell you the most I've seen, so you would need to, we have 12,000 capacity. So you would need to see 6,000 plus one-ish protest votes saying we oppose the rate increase. The most I've ever seen is about a dozen. It doesn't mean that you can't still, as a board, listen to those 12 and invalidate a rate increase. But if you get the 6,000 plus one, it's automatically invalidated.
The vote is one vote per capacity unit.
Yes,
So Pepsi has a lot of votes.
yes. But the most I've seen is like a dozen. So, not to say that this year would be different if we had a rate increase and if we had a protest vote, Prop 218 protest vote, it would take 6,000 plus one votes essentially to invalidate that rate increase. I doubt that's going to happen. But we still have to go through the Prop 218 process. You can still listen to the 1 or 10 or 20 or so people who oppose the vote and decide to not increase the rates. There's enough time in this schedule to hold the hearing and to either adopt the rate increase or not adopt the rate increase. And we would still have time to put all of that information onto the tax rolls for the next fiscal year.
My question, thank you.
Plenty of time to do either or anywhere in the process.
Why the June meeting is recommended to be moved up a week. That final process.
Can I make a question or a comment?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay, I think I've been doing my comment and then two questions. One, 2 years ago, I think in the summer of 21, we voted for a rate increase. And at the time I estimated that would bring us in an additional 400,000 or so of revenue from our ratepayers. And at the end of the year, we put 400,000 back into a various account of money that we didn't spend. Last year, I think we put 600,000 back. So in the last 2 years, in my mind, we've taken $1 million out of our community to put into our $25 million kitty that was unnecessary. So the questions are, what happens if we do a rate decrease? Do we still have to go through the Prop 218? And my second question is, I'm going to be gone out of the nation until May 7th. So is it possible to move that May 1st meeting to May 8th?
Couple of things. I'll go in reverse. We can't move the May 1st meeting because a 45-day time clock starts in terms of sending out notices of a Proposition 218 vote. So if we move that May meeting later, the 45 days moves later for the public hearing, and then we don't have time to do the budget adoption and the notices that we're required to do post 218 approval. So the only thing we could potentially do is move the whole thing sooner. But then we'd have to move sooner in April for the preliminary budget document and going that way. We can't go later. The second or the first part about your comments about the money going back into the reserves. We have a couple of accounts that vary widely over the course of a year. And those accounts pay penalties if they go over their allotted allocation. If we budget for them to go over and then they don't go over, then we have a budget hole. And so what we have chosen to do as a district over the years is budget what we actually, the allocations that we actually have. And if some of those accounts go over and pay penalties and interest fees, that those monies go back into the district. And in one way, those monies, those overages have actually been able to pay for costs and avoid rate increases rather than causing rate increases. So I don't think it's prudent to budget assuming that somebody's going to pay penalties and interest and then have them come in and not pay. And then we've got a $400,000 hole in our budget.
So let me ask this. I think it's a bigger question. Really, the question I had from the time I started on the board, which is 2 years ago. So this district has nearly $25 million in reserves and all kinds of different accounts and all that. I don't know of any other district that has any kind of basically that's 2.5 years of operating expense. I don't see any reason why we need to have that much reserve. So what I'm thinking is it would be worth our time, either through staff or the finance committee or both, to go through and see what would happen if instead of having a $25 million reserve, we had a $15 million reserve. And what would that look like in terms of rate reductions over the next 5 years in order to get us down to that level of reserve? Because it just seems to me silly that we just keep adding more money to our pot, so to speak, without really having a need for it. I think we've shown just recently with 2 major breaks that we're approaching a $2 million expense if we're not reimbursed. So I think the catastrophic failure argument for having that much reserve is not particularly meaningful, liable. I don't know. In my view, it just doesn't make sense compared to what we've actually seen. So, and the other thing is around the budget is, what we typically forecast expenses, but I don't remember last year or the year before there being any kind of a capital expense forecast. And so, I think if we're going to have these reserves, then we need to have some projection of, when do we think we're really going to spend it, as opposed to just having a very nice bank account. So anyway, that would be my suggestion for the board is let's really look at that and figure out how much reserve do we really need? Can we get that lower? And can we do that by, let's just say an example, cutting our rates by 5% and holding them flat for several years until such time as our overall reserve is down to whatever we decide it should be, 15 million, 18 million, a year and a half of operating expense. I've just never liked the fact that we're carrying that much money for no apparent reason.
We'll be happy to put together a proposal or in the budget.
Mr. Martinson, with regard to item 11, the budget schedule, how do you feel about the schedule?
I think the schedule is fine. It's just my personal life doesn't fit it. That's all. So, and I think as far as the May 1st, May 8th, that's only appropriate if we're going to, and that's only a concern if we're going to increase the rates. And I would absolutely not vote for any kind of a rate increase right now. So, and I know there's certain notice periods and all that. As far as moving it earlier, that puts a lot of burden on the staff and everybody to try to get things done earlier. And I wouldn't suggest we do that just because I'm not going to be here. That wouldn't be appropriate in my mind. So.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Item 11. Motion.
I have one.
Jack, go ahead.
Jack, we can't hear you.
Muted. We're not hearing you, Jack.
Is FEMA going to give us any upfront money?
No, FEMA will not give us upfront money.
Okay, so we're looking at a couple of $1 million that we're gonna float.
We're gonna have to cover all the costs for all of the repairs. I've met with FEMA twice. They completely agree with the scope of work and the eligibility, but it's work that we have to pay for first and then get reimbursed for.
Did they tell you when we would be reimbursed?
They said no earlier than 90 days. They say it could be 6 months, it could be 2 years.
Right, usually it's 2 years. Usually it's 2 years. The last two that I went through with FEMA. Okay.
Comments?
And the other thing is, when we talk about reserves, what would we be if we didn't have our reserves? We wouldn't be able to do this treatment plant of $8 or $10 million worth of work and not go out and put a bond issue out to cost us more money. But we've got the reserve here to do
$8
it.
million reserve right there.
Yeah.
I think it's
Well,
possible.
I'm not suggesting we go to 0. I'm just suggesting 25 seems way high. 15 may be too low, but if we were at 18 or 20, that still would represent a fairly sizable rate reduction over the next 5 or 6 years to get us down to that level. So
Well,
that's the kind of thing I'm suggesting, not just dump the reserve altogether. That would be silly.
yeah, but our clients get, what is that, $30,000 a month
What's that?
out of our interest in that, and that goes back into the general fund. So that is really a cut on their taxes and their rates right there.
You know what? I think we need to keep this topic on the schedule. Director Martinson's asked for a comprehensive review of our reserves. We'll be happy to do that. I think we have a whole bunch of information that is out there. Item 16 gives us a picture of where we are. We actually only have 18 million in our reserves right now before FEMA and our capital project at the plant. So I think we'll put together a proposal that includes all the current information in our CIP and make that part of the budget presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. With regard to the budget preparation schedule, do I have a motion?
I'll move approval.
Second,
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve item 11A through E. Allison, would you please take the roll call?
Director Kentosh,
Yes.
Director Martinson.
Yep.
Lowell.
Yes.
Yes, okay, I didn't hear him. Director Curtis,
yes.
Director Stone,
Yes.
Director Quillisi,
Yes.
Director Ulrich,
Yes.
and Chair Berg.
Yes. All right, thank you. Item 12, California Special District Association Board of Directors nominations for seat C. Any of our directors have a recommendation or a nomination?
This is really up for you if you want to run for CSDA or somebody you'd like to vote for CSDA.
I think we did have Russ Baggerly at one point.
Years ago, years and years and years ago.
He was flying up to Sacramento.
This involves a lot of travel to Sacramento as I saw it. Yeah.
Yes, it involves a lot of getting up early and driving to Burbank and then being there all day in Sacramento and then coming home back to Burbank and getting out of the airplane and you're in the middle of the traffic flow and it's getting home back to Ojai at 9 o'clock at night.
Sounds like it's not a job you want, Jack.
Well,
We don't have to nominate anybody. If it's no action, that's fine too.
If we don't have a nomination, we can.
Anybody interested?
Anyone in our district interested in running?
Three.
Crickets. Yeah. Okay, that being the case, we're moving to item 13. Resolution 2023-06, designation of applicant's agent.
So we have, we need to have on file with FEMA through OES, people that can sign the various paperwork packages that are generated by FEMA and OES for our reimbursement funds. We have listed the general manager, admin officer, and operations manager, Rick. We haven't listed them by name because years ago we got in trouble. We listed them by name and then that person left and we had nobody that could officially sign and we had to beg for forgiveness from FEMA for OES. So this is just a recurring designation to make sure we have all the signatures in place for FEMA and OES.
You mean the system does not allow for normal migration?
Oh,
Move
gosh.
for approval.
We have
Second that.
motion and a second to approve item 13. Allison, please take roll.
Director Pintosh,
Yes.
Director Martinson,
Yes.
Director Curtis,
Yes.
Director Stone,
Yes.
Director Quillisi,
Yes.
Ulrich,
Yes.
and Chair Bird.
Yes. Thank you. We're moving now to item 14, A, B, and C. 449 amendments to the Brown Act Open Meetings Act regarding remote attendance.
So I'll sort of start this. There's a legal piece for sure that Robert has done a lot of work on and overseen, kind of how we prepared this. And then there's a practical part, how we do business on a day-to-day basis. As we see the practical part, starting after tomorrow, we expect the governor to let the COVID emergency declarations lapse. And that would put us into a board operating sort of scenario under Assembly Bill 2449. And from a practical standpoint, it means that this is our place of business. And that in order to conduct meetings, a quorum has to be here at the board meeting. If we have a board meeting and only 3 people show up, then the board meeting doesn't happen because we don't have a quorum in place. If we have a quorum in place, the meeting can happen. And for any board member who wants to participate remotely, they would have to either ahead of the meeting, put in one of the 2 requests for consideration to appear remotely, that if they got those in time for the package, that those would be in your package, that board member X and Y were going to be remote and requested permission under this section of the code, and Robert's outlined what those code sections are. Those requests would be in the board packet. If something happened after the board packet went out and another board member said, oh, can't make the meeting, I want to be attend remotely, they could come in on WebEx along with whoever had submitted requests for consideration. And the board, the quorum here, would hear those requests. So in practical terms, we have to have a quorum here. If you want to attend remotely, you have to submit one of these 2 sort of legal forms to say, I want to either, I have an emergency situation or I have a just cause reason for attending remotely. And then there's a process for the quorum here to evaluate those requests and consider them and or approve or deny them. And Robert will lead us through the legal process for those. But it means that someone can attend remotely, but only if approved by the quorum here. And then there are a certain number of meetings that in a row or a total in a course of a year, you can use one of these 2 requests. You can't just miss every meeting, come in remotely and say, well, I'm out of town. There's a limit to how many times you could use that request. And there's obviously a approval denial process for the quorum here to approve or deny those requests. So that's sort of the overall practical process. Robert, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, let me just add a few things to what you said, Jeff, and thank you for setting forth the proper context for this AB 2449 and continued compliance with the Brown Act. And again, we all remember that we were able to meet remotely because of the COVID pandemic, because of the emergency, and because of a series of executive orders from the governor's office that suspended or waived provisions in the Brown Act for remote attendance to these meetings. Now that has been transitioning back to what is, considered pre-COVID Brown Act. The first movement in that direction was AB 361, which is what you've been operating on for much of the last year, maybe year and a half now. And now that that's going away, that was all premised upon the emergency declaration and the pandemic situation. Now that that's going away, the legislature has seen fit to do another kind of transition law that doesn't take us all the way back to pre-COVID Brown Act, but provides this little interim legislation to allow some flexibility for people who still need to possibly meet or attend remotely at your board meetings. So that's what 2449 is. It's another step back towards normal Brown Act remote attendance. And normal Brown Act remote attendance is you would post the agenda wherever the remote attendee is located. The remote attendee would have to make that place open to the public so that anyone who can actually join the board member in his remote location, his or her remote location, to participate in the meeting and then to get that information. So that takes a lot of coordination, a lot more noticing, a lot more logistical issues. But that's the Brown Act, and eventually it will get back to that in hopefully 2026. And I use hopefully just from the legislator standpoint. Many people would like to see more flexibility built into the Brown Act, but that is the overall goal of AB 2449. And as Jeff already pointed out, here the most important precondition is if someone is going to want to attend remotely, there has to be a quorum of the board in attendance physically at one place at one time for that meeting. The people who constitute that quorum in the physical location will be the body that decides whether or not the request to meet or attend remotely will be approved or not. There are two basic reasons for meeting remotely. The just cause reason, which is outlined in Exhibit 1 to the board letter. There are only 4 circumstances for a just cause remote attendance at a board meeting. If the board member either has a child care or caregiving need of a child, parent, grandparent, grandchild, sibling, spouse, or domestic partner, that is a proper basis for a just cause attendance remotely. They could have a contagious illness that prevents them from attending in person. That also is a basis for meeting on a just cause. And that doesn't have to necessarily be a quote unquote pandemic type of illness. It could be something as simple as I'm very contagious and I have the flu, or I have the cold and I can't make it that day. Thirdly, there is a physical or mental disability that that you have a need for, or the board member has a need for, that prevents them from in-person attendance, and which is not already accommodated by ADA provisions in the government code. And fourth and finally, the board member is traveling on the meeting date, but that travel has to be official business of OVSD. This can't simply be, I'm on a vacation and I want to attend remotely and I want to use the just cause basis for meeting. That is not considered just cause. That it has to be official business travel for that just cause. Understand that there are limitations for the use of just cause, and the limitation on just cause is it's not that much. You can only use it, I believe, 2 times in the year. And let me just get that so that I can properly get that information to you. The just cause is limited to no more than 2 times per calendar year. Okay. Then the second basis for a remote attendance is the emergency circumstances. And that's where the board member can articulate that he or she has a personal physical medical emergency or family medical emergency that prevents them from attending in person and that substantiates their participating remotely. The board member is asked to state the grounds for that personal or family medical emergency in no more than 20 words. It doesn't have to be detailed. It doesn't have to reveal HIPAA protected personal information. And it just needs to be stated in a written memo that I've provided as Exhibit 2 there. There is a limit to the emergency circumstances basis for meeting or for attending remotely. And it gets fairly complicated, and it all is based upon how many meetings the board meets or has meetings on for the year. And meetings would not only include the board of director meetings, but it would also include your standing committee meetings. So you'd have to basically figure out how many total public meetings there are and how many public meetings the person who is claiming an emergency circumstance seeks to limit or seeks to attend remotely. And it's done on a percentage basis or on a consecutive month basis. But it all that again depends upon the individual circumstances. And I'm not going to, at this point in time, put out numbers or dates and times like that. I think it's important that whoever is wanting to avail themselves of it, if possible, contact me and I can help you with the calculation or how many times you think you will need to attend remotely and stay within the bounds of the statute. So that's in it in a nutshell. These 2 memos were provided to you, so it's an easy way for you to access or use them as you see fit. And that if you have questions about whether or not you qualify for one or the other, I think is a simple call to council, and that can make it things a lot easier. Jeff makes a good point that if things just pop up very quickly after the agenda has been published, that you have an agenda item, and I think Allison and Jeff are going to have a standing agenda item to deal with any potential remote requests that come in after the board package is published. And that's fine too. And if that's the case, there is a way to do that. It does then maybe the possibility of having something in writing is not going to be that available to them, but you would have to state on the record again the basis for that change, and then for the board members who are the quorum then to rule on that. And again, nothing says you have to attend every meeting on a remote basis. So if you don't think that you need to be at a particular meeting, nothing stops you from not coming to that meeting, and nobody's requiring 100% attendance. Obviously, you want to be involved, but that's great. But there may be circumstances where it doesn't fit the remote provisions under AB 2449. It's okay. You don't have to use one of these to do that. It's only when you want to be there and you meet the qualifications of remote that you avail yourselves of these 2 grounds.
Thank you, Mr. Kwong. Very complete.
Mr. Kwong, I've got
Yes.
one question. We kind of use interchangeably attend versus participate. For instance, if I were on vacation and did not have a legitimate excuse other than I'm on vacation, I could still attend the meeting remotely just as any member of the public would. I just can't participate, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
You can make a public comment, but your public comment would be treated as if you were just a public member. That's
Right.
fine.
At
Yes,
the beginning of the meeting, right? Okay.
exactly. Right.
Deliberate and vote.
Okay, thank you. Any other director comments on this subject? Mr. Quilisi.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kwong, for that explanation. I'm looking at least one of the paragraphs in 2449 that talks about how many times you can do this, and it's still not clear to me maybe you could help. It's 54943 F3. It says the provisions of this subdivision shall not serve as a means for any member of the legislative body to participate in meetings of the legislative body solely by teleconference from a remote location for a period of more than 3 consecutive months. This is the emergency circumstance thing.
Right.
Or 20% of the regular meetings for the local agency within a calendar year.
Yes.
Or more than 2 meetings if the legislative body regularly meets fewer than 10 times per calendar year.
Right.
We meet more. But I'm trying to figure out, it talks about more than 3 consecutive months, but it doesn't set a limit on the total number of remote meetings. Maybe there's something else in the bill that today again, I'm missing. But for example, would it be legal for a board member to participate remotely by teleconference for 3 months in a row, then choose to not attend a meeting or attend, as Director Martinson was saying, as a member of the public, then go back to another 3 consecutive months? I haven't found where it says you can't do that, and I may have missed something, so I'm asking for your help to understand that.
Yeah, that is one of the areas of the law that is unsettled. Remember, this is a brand new law, and most every agency is going to go through these little growing pains about using 2449. I think that the scenario that you're suggesting, Mr. Quillisi, is kind of, how shall I put it? Trying to game the legislation a little bit.
Feel
and
like
trying
the
to
spirit of the legislation.
circumvent the spirit of the law, which was to really allow for someone with a medical emergency, and we don't know what it could be. It could be cancer, it could be a broken leg, it could be a car accident, it could be many things that would need 3 months at a time, and that it would be up to the board to then, with council's guidance, to see whether or not they can extend that period of time. So I think that at this point in time, that's a nice question, but I don't think that we need to kind of delve into that at this point in time. And you've correctly pointed out there are 3 basic limitations on the emergency circumstances provision. The consecutive 3 months, and let's say your board meets 6 times in 3 months, or maybe 10 times in 3 months. It covers every one of those meetings, okay? 20% would be then you'd have to calculate all the meetings that you have. And is that provide you even more time to be away and to attend remotely? So it all depends on the total number of meetings that are being involved and what is the particular circumstance of the board member. So again, it's a good question. It's an academic one, but at this point in time, I would just say that let's take it on a case-by-case basis based on the number of meetings you have scheduled, which would include committee meetings, and seeing how many the situation is needed for the board member who wants to attend remotely.
Very good. Mr. Kintosh.
A couple quick questions. We have to adopt this whether or not the governor declares an emergency over tomorrow. We have to adopt this either case.
This is already, 2449 doesn't already been passed and by the legislature and is in effect. We don't get the choice to adopt it or not adopt it. What happened was 2449 was approved as 361 still existed, and 361, because of its provisions, kind of trumped 2449. But as soon as 361 goes away with the end of the governor's declaration, all that exists is 2449. And so 2449, unless something magical happens and the governor extends the declaration tomorrow, 2449 is in effect today and actually functionally goes into effect tomorrow when 361 dies.
Correct.
It's not for us to approve or disapprove. It's the law.
It's already there.
It is, yeah, this is the law right now. And again, like I said, 2449 is a transition law, and it's to bring people who have been living off of the COVID-based executive orders and 361 back into a regular Brown Act meeting type of a situation. And remember, the Brown Act was always designed to give the public access to your meetings. And the more that you have remote meetings that are not accessible by other people, that was always seen as a compromise on the Brown Act. So they want to get back to what the Brown Act required and to have the public have the highest amount of participation and understanding of the boards.
There you go.
Okay. As I understand it, we're to receive and file the report AB 2449. Item B, approve the use of memorandum templates. Item C, and roll call procedure. So really,
Correct.
we're being asked to acknowledge and approve the changes to our board meetings.
Right.
Our board meetings. So with that in mind, we'd like to hear a motion.
Move approval then.
Second.
Okay, we do have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion on this item? Okay, Allison, please take.
Director Kintosh,
Yes.
Director Martinson,
Yes.
Director Curtis,
Yes.
Director Stone,
Yes.
Director Quillisi,
Yes.
Director Ulrich,
Yes.
and Chair Berg.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. We're moving now to the information items for receipt and file. Items 15 through 21. Any comments? Directors, I did attend the CASA conference in San Diego. It was pretty informative. I'm not a big fan of the round table format. The one I attended, the round table format was, they discussed PFAS, and other microplastics and things that we all have in our systems now, according to the round table discussion. And it's very difficult. Those are lifetime chemicals. They don't go away. Those are atoms. Is that correct?
The PFAS and PFAS are two big families of chemicals. The way I describe them, Teflon is one of them. And so if you Scotchgard, if you scratch your Teflon pots and you ingest your Teflon, those legacy chemicals never go away. And there are some links to too much PFAS and PFAS in domestic water systems that potentially cause problems to young and old and immunocompromised people. So it's becoming a big thing in our industry of, is it in our system? How do we get it out? And all of those sorts of questions. It's going to be the next great contaminant issue in our business. Right now we're dealing with nitrogen and phosphorus and nutrients. PFAS and PFAS are going to be the next big push.
It's going to be a challenge. And then on Thursday of the CASA conference, our keynote speaker was scheduled to be Erin Brockovich. And when we got close to the conference, it was discovered that she had double booked herself. So she didn't appear, and we had a good keynote speech from Bob Bocock, who happens to work with Erin Brockovich on similar subjects, similar issues throughout the country. She did present a 30-minute summary of what presentation would have been, so it was almost like she was there anyway. Very informative. So it was a good conference in Palm Springs. With that, we can now move on to item 21, board member and general manager comments. Board member comments tonight. Anything from the board? General manager, Jeff?
A couple of things. I'm not sure. I haven't gotten a update recently, last few days. If you haven't filled out your Form 700, please do that online. Allison and I will get noticed sooner or later if you are on the bad guy
List.
the list. So please do your notifications. It's due by April 1st. Just make sure you do those. Again, FEMA's been out a couple of times. The bureaucracy of claims and paperwork is getting rolling. where we already have separate files set up for all of those things. It's going to be a pretty exhaustive process, but we'll go through that for our reimbursement funds. A couple of things. Friday night's rain was challenging. It was less than we got in January. Obviously rain is great because our lakes and groundwater are responding, but we're definitely seeing the effects of groundwater in our system. On Saturday, again, our normal flow before winter is about 1.5 million gallons a day. On Saturday, we pushed 5.5 million gallons through the plant. So we're pushing real hard on all the systems. If you go down there, there's quite a big lake out in front of the plant. The guys used the drying beds almost to capacity to try and alleviate filter flows. Couple of other things. We're starting the budget prep. You will see some information flow on that as we get going. Our new employee who filled our position in the collection system, Alex Villanueva, started and is integrating into the collection system team real well. So we're happy to have him on board. That's all I have.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
I have a question. Several months ago, we had a closed session item, and we haven't had a closed session for a while. Whatever happened to that, without?
I will, right, I will say, it's still ongoing, and, Robert and I communicate regularly, and, if anything, sort of pops up on the interim level, I have a conversation with the chair just to let him know we're moving forward so that there's, some understanding at the board level that things are where they are. At this point, I don't see any need for an additional closed session. So we'll let things kind of play out for a little bit.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kentosh. Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight. Mr. Kwok, thank you for your excellent discussion on the AB.
Thank you, guys. We'll see you.
Thank you.
And nice to see you again, Leslie.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
It's adjourned at 7:12.
He knows me.